Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Can you see it?
Yes.
Right now. Okay. So today's presentations is about Hoyas. This Hoya here on the picture is my Hoya carnosa that I've had forever. This is my picture taken by me. However, in these presentations, there will be pictures that are not my property, that are not mine, that are just found on the internet. So I just want everybody to know about it. And the inspiration for this talk is taken from another Hoya presentation that took place in our club. I'm not sure how many years ago Anne and Marg presented about Hoyas, and that presentation really opened my eyes to the fact that there is more than Hoya carnosa when it comes to Hoyas. And then a few years ago, again, I don't remember how many, during our one of the show and sales, I bought some Hoyas from Eric, and with really various luck, I still have some of them. However, this is my original Hoya, the Hoya that I've had, as I said, forever. I took a cutting of this Hoya from my sister, and it blooms for me. It grows really nicely, and I'm very happy with it. So the first thing I would like to discuss is that where Hoyas are in the how taxonomical are they classified. And here is already a problem, because according to different sources, they are classified differently. One source says that there is a huge family of Asclepiadaceae, and Hoya is one of the is a genus of that family. And the other source says that no, there is a larger family called Apocynaceae, and Hoya belongs to a subfamily of this family, which is Asclepiadoideae. And well, we as people who are looking at the plants and are not making decisions about which taxon to which taxon a group of plants belongs, we have to remember that taxons are created by people for the convenience of talking about plants or living organisms, and to make it easier to describe the natural world. So when we are talking about taxonomy, the important thing is to stick to one way of classifying the plants and not switching from one way to the other. And to keep in mind that in nature, the taxons are not really represented in any way, that they are artificial groups. And the modern taxonomy is trying to represent the relationship, the evolutionary relationships between organisms. And the closer in taxonomy they are, in the classification they are, the closer the relationship, the evolutionary relationship between the organisms is. And we have to also remember that the only entity that really exists in nature is an organism, and everything else is just something that people created, is something that is artificially created by people. Even the species, sometimes the definition of species is very blurry. A species is supposed to be a group of organisms that are interbreeding and producing viable offsprings. And here, very often, especially with plants, but with animals too, there are problems, because we have hybrids. We have hybrids that produce viable offsprings, and what to do with them. So when we are talking about groups of organisms, the definition of it is very arbitrary and sometimes very, very blurry. Okay, so that's about the taxonomy at a larger scale. And I chose to assume that Hoya belongs to the family Asclepiadaceae and not to the family Apocynaceae. So that's my choice. And in the family Asclepiadaceae, there are about 2,900 species, and they are grouped into 348 genera. And many plants, including, and these are, and I will be talking right now about the characteristics of plants that belong to that family. Many of those plants, including some of Hoyas, but not all of them, have milky juice inside their leaves, inside their stems. The flowers are have 5 petals, and the petals are merged at the base. So only the tips of the stems are separate, of the petals are separated. The fruits are pod-like, like sacs that are filled with seeds, and the seeds very often are tufted, very often have tufts of hairs attached, and they are spread by wind. Male and female parts of each flower are united in a single structure. And the pollen is massed in bundles called pollinia, and that makes it very difficult to artificially pollinate plants from the family Asclepiadaceae because the pollen is quite heavy, and because the female and male parts are basically forming a single structure, you have to be an insect, and you have to be, or a bird, and you have to be adapted to this particular type of a flower to be able to move that pollinium from one place to the other and pollinate the flower. So that's why the seeds are not really that often seen in house plants, in Hoyas that are kept inside, away from the pollinators. And then I will show you some examples now of the genera of Asclepiadaceae. Not many, but just the ones with which we are certainly familiar, and that might be a surprise to some of us to know that those plants belong to the same family as Hoyas. So the first group of plants will be Stapillions. And to that group belong plants like genera like Stapilia, Orbea, Huernia, Caroluma. And these plants actually are mine. I am very fond of Stapillions, and they are my plants. Okay, so this is one example. The other example is the oleander, Nerium Oleander, which is a very commonly kept plant kept at home. It is a plant that is originally from the Mediterranean regions, but it's a very common house plant. This is not my plant, but I have one, but this is not a picture of my plant. This is just oleander. Very, very nice plant, but not a succulent. And here is milkweed, which is a very common plant native to Ontario, famous by the fact that monarch butterfly caterpillars are feeding on its leaves. It contains a sap that is like a milky liquid inside their leaves, and it is very poisonous. And then monarch butterfly caterpillars, when they feed on those leaves, become poisonous themselves. And the butterflies, when they emerge, when they are transformed into butterflies, they are also poisonous. And I'm talking about them because it's a very cool example of how evolution works. It doesn't have anything to do with Hoyas, but it's very interesting. And milkweed flowers are very similar in shape to Hoya's flowers, very almost identical. So that's interesting. And then what also is interesting is that there is a butterfly called Viceroy, which looks exactly like monarch butterfly, but is not poisonous. And monarch butterfly is very brightly colored because poisonous animals are very often brightly colored to somehow warn potential butterfly eaters that they are poisonous, about that it's not safe to eat them. So it's quite cool. And I included here also the seed pods of milkweed. I somehow didn't think about including a picture of seed pods that are open and filled with seeds. The seeds are they look a little bit like big seeds of a dandelion. They are spread by wind, and oleander has exactly the same type of seeds, except the pods are very narrow, more like beans. So this is a typical way of how Asclepiadaceae seed pods look. And this is periwinkle, again, a common plant that is very often seen in people's gardens, a perennial with flowers that look exactly like oleander's flowers, except the color is different. It is also a member of the family Asclepiadaceae. And finally, we have Hoyas. We have the genus Hoya, which contains, depending on the source, from 200 to 300 species. So the difference between 200 and 300 is just huge. It's not just a matter of one or two species. So this discrepancy between different authors and between different ways of classifying plants shows how blurry the definition of a species is. Okay, so this is my Hoya. This is Hoya carnosa. This is my flower. And Hoyas are sometimes called wax plants because of their succulent and shiny leaves. Hoyas are vines. They have succulent leaves. Succulent means fleshy, means being able to store water. But the degree of their succulentism, if I can use that word, if a word like that exists, varies from species to species. There are species that have much more soft leaves, and there are species that have really thick and leather-like leaves. And even though many Hoyas have succulent leaves, they are not necessarily from dry environments, and they don't necessarily are plants that need periods of drought. And they are found in Southeast Asia and in Australia. The way Hoyas grow, and again, there is a picture to illustrate it. At first, they grow a very long leafless stem. And then at the nodules, develop leaves, and each nodule will have one pair of leaves. And if the plant is happy, the leaves will form. If the plant is not happy, a leafless stem can stay leafless for a very long time. And sometimes it might even dry out and die before the leaves develop. And sometimes the stem might branch at a nodule, and depending on the species, this ability to branch out is either more pronounced or less. Some species branch out very easily, and some species develop new stems rather at the base of the plant. And the flowers are quite interesting because in a nodule, there can, instead of just two leaves or a new stem that can grow from the nodule, there can be a new flower, there can develop a flowering stem. And this flowering stem, once it develops, it produces flowers over and over again at different times of the year, and more often in the summer, and also the frequency will depend on the species. And the flowers will develop from the same stem over and over again. This is called the peduncle. And this plant, for example, has been blooming for many years, probably because the peduncle is quite long. So the first flowers that appeared here. And then each time the flowers fall down, and new flowers will form a little bit further away from the base of the stem. So these are all scars from flowers that formed probably years before this picture has been taken. And the trick is, when someone is keeping Hoyas, the trick is for the flowering stem to appear. And this may be very, very tricky. It may take years. For some species, it is more difficult than for others. And only when it happens, the plant will keep producing flowers there. But again, how often the flowers will appear depends on the species, and depends also on the conditions in which the plant is kept. But the first step to have a flowering specimen is for the plant to produce this peduncle. And once it is formed, it's very important not to damage it, not to break it off, because then the plant would have to develop it somewhere else. It will not develop at the same nodule again. So this is my Hoya carnosa, but it's a different plant than the one that was on the first slide. This one is a variety that I got from Fred. It is called tricolor. And Hoya carnosa is the most popular Hoya of all. However, the tricolor variety is not really that popular. It is called tricolor because the leaves of this plant come in 3 different colors. And these are the leaves from up a little bit closer. I didn't take a picture here of a leaf that is completely pink, but there is some pink color here, so that's one color. There is white or yellowish, another color, and green, the third color. So that's why it is called Hoya tricolor. Very, very attractive plant, and equally in my experience, again, I'm not saying that for everybody it will be the same. For me, Hoya carnosa is the easiest species to keep. But again, and in different houses, in different environment, in different conditions, it might not be the same. And here is another plant that is my plant that grows nicely for me. This is Hoya Gracilis. The leaves of Hoya Gracilis are about 1/3, maybe 1/2 the size of Hoya carnosas. The flowers are quite interesting because they are very dark in color, and the petals are turned upwards, which means they are turned towards the base of the stem, of the flowering stem. They are very fragrant, and Hoya carnosa's flowers are very fragrant as well. And I think most Hoya's flowers are fragrant. And what is interesting, that the scent is produced only at night, because Hoyas are pollinated by moths. Moths are active at night. So the very expensive process of producing a scent would be very wasteful to produce it during the day when moths are not available. So this is quite interesting as well, in my opinion. Here is another Hoya that I have, but it's not my picture. It's not my Hoya, but Hoya Matilde. It grows very nicely for me as well, but it only bloomed once last year. The plant itself is quite large and healthy, but I only had flowers on it once last year, even though I have the plant for a long time. And the other thing that I would like to mention is that Hoyas do like to be fertilized. And my Hoya Matilde was really not doing much for a very, very long time. And once I attended a Dalibor's presentation last year about fertilizers, I fertilized my Hoyas and it made a huge difference. So again, one more like all the presentations that I attended in our club were very inspirational, but this one actually inspired my my experience with Hoyas. In like, I learned quite a lot from that, and Hoyas have benefited from that particular presentation. This is Hoya engleriana, which I have, again, bought it from at one of the show and sales from the same source, from Eric. Mine grows beautifully, however, it has never bloomed. And it is a very interesting plant because it has very tiny leaves. And I can only imagine that the flowers, even though they look exactly like Hoya carnosa's flowers, are probably very tiny as well. So I'm looking forward to have flowers on my Hoya engleriana. And this Hoya is a Hoya that never bloomed for me. This Hoya has very large leaves, very thick leaves, Hoya parasitica, and I'm looking forward to the day when it finally blooms. Right now, as I said, grows nicely, but nothing happens. And this is Hoya lacunosa, which is my failure. This is not my plant again. I bought it, or when I bought the other Hoyas from Eric as well, it was, when I bought it, it was just a rooted stem in peat moss. It grew beautiful roots when it was kept in a glass of water. And then when I transplanted it into a pot, it was not dying, but it was not growing either. And this year, finally, this summer, it gave up and it died on me. However, I know that Fred's Hoya lacunosa is growing beautifully. I remember that Genus showed her Hoya lacunosa at our virtual show, and hers is spectacular. And somehow I didn't have luck with my Hoya lacunosa at all. Hoya retusa, another plant that I have newly acquired. I got it from Fred, but mine is a very small specimen, rooted and planted and potted, but I'm not sure how it will grow. I'm not sure how it will like my place and the flowers. And this picture looks very looks very promising, but I'm not sure whether I will be able to make my Hoya retusa into such a spectacular specimen. I hope. Oh, and Hoya engleriana again. I don't know how it happened that I have it twice. Hoya engleriana again. And Hoya Carey I have this Hoya, but I will, I put it here just to show it to you how it looks when it is a like a good looking plant. And I will talk about it again when I talk about propagation of Hoyas. But Hoya Carey is a quite popular Hoya, and these are the flowers of Hoya Carey. Okay, so the propagation is usually almost always done by cuttings, because seeds are formed in the wild, but extremely rarely in cultivations, because there are no pollinators, and artificial pollination is not really that easy. And the majority of Hoyas produce roots very easily, and that's true not only for Hoyas, but for all vines. All vines do produce roots easily. When a vine grows very long and the stem reaches a spot where it could take roots, it does it then, and that's how the stems are getting longer and longer and longer. So Hoyas are not difficult when it comes to producing roots, at least in my experience, but the difficulty comes when they are planted into substrate or into soil. That's where they become tricky. And this is Hoya Carey again. These are rooted leaves that are sold quite often. And I have one of those leaves that I got from my neighbor who was moving and was getting rid of her plants. And she had a planted rooted leaf of Hoya Carey or Carey, and she gave it to me, and I was really hoping that I will have a plant, but no. What happens is that these leaves might grow to be a plant only if they were attached to to at least a part of a stem, or a part of a stem was attached to the tip of the leaf. If it's only a leaf, there will be no plant growing from it. The leaf will grow, even in size. The leaf will get a little bit bigger and bigger and might stay for years, and nothing will happen. I tried to cut the base of this leaf where the roots were produced, hoping that maybe when I make a cut, when I damage the leaf, somehow the stem of the leaf, the leaf stem, maybe the true stem will be produced at that spot, but I was not successful. So this is quite interesting. During the last meeting, Dave was talking about how fenestrarias leaves will not grow to be a plant if there is no stem. So the care of Hoyas depends on the species. And in my experience, some species are very moody. And again, what is here on this slide is my experience only. And as I said, with some species, I'm quite successful. With some species, I'm not at all. And what is here is based on my personal experience. So they seem to like well aerated substrate with lots of mineral component. So they like to have air pockets somewhere in their substrate. They respond very well to fertilizer, and the effects of fertilizing Hoyas may be noticed within days. Really, like it was quite an experience to see how well they responded to a 20-20-20 liquid fertilizer. And they grow well when they are kept moist, but if for some reason I cannot water them and they are not watered for a longer time, they seem not to mind it. And this again probably depends on the species, but I am not that experienced with them. And this is why when we switch to discussion, to questions and answers, I will ask Fred to help me with answering the questions, because Fred is really an expert when it comes to Hoyas. Okay, so that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hanna.